My father weighed 171 pounds. And I know that number because his cardiologist wanted me to weigh him 2 weeks before the world ended. 171 pounds doesn't sound like much. It does when you have to carry it 40 miles across a country that stopped working, past things that used to be people, on a back that's already torn, with a broken ankle that isn't yours. His stroke took the running out of him 3 years ago. And when the outbreak reached our valley, running was the only skill that still mattered. He knew it before I did. He looked at me from the passenger seat and said the words I still hear every night. "Leave the heavy man, son. Take the light road." I didn't leave him. I put him on my back and I walked. But there was a river before safety, and men on the only bridge who took everything you carried and fired over the heads of children to move them along. There was a beta blocker bottle getting lighter in my pocket every day, and a heart on my back racing itself toward the end. And there was a choice. Trust cruel men, or trust my own failing spine in black water that I got wrong in the one way a son can never take back. There's a birthday card in this story I kept on a dashboard for a year, because sending it made a hard thing real. My father understood exactly why. What he did with that card, in the last second we had, is the part I've never been able to say out loud until now. Let me tell you how it actually began. My father weighed 171 pounds the morning the world ended. And I know that number because I'd weighed him myself 2 weeks earlier, on the bathroom scale, because his cardiologist wanted a log. 171 pounds does not sound like much until you have to carry it across 40 miles of a country that has stopped working, past things that used to be people, on a broken ankle that isn't yours. The first mile was the easiest. That's the part nobody tells you. When it started, I still had the truck, and I still believed the radio, and I still thought my father could walk if I just gave him my arm. He couldn't. His stroke had taken the right side of him 3 years before, and the physical therapy had given some of it back, but not the part that lets a man run. And by the second hour of the outbreak in our valley, running was the only skill that mattered. He knew it before I did. He looked at me in the passenger seat with that half of his face that still moved, and he said the thing that would echo in my head for the next 4 days. "Leave the heavy man, son. Take the light road." I didn't leave him. That's the whole story in a way. But it cost more than I knew how to count. And I'm going to tell you all of it. So let me take you back to where it started. My name is Baird Kessler. I was 46 years old, and I fixed diesel engines for a living in a town called Cresswell Bend, tucked into the dry hills of the interior where the summers cracked the ground and the winters barely bothered. I'd worked the same shop for 20 years. A low steel building off Route 9 with a hydraulic lift that groaned and a coffee machine older than my marriage. My hands were the kind of ruined you can't wash clean. Grease in the creases, 2 fingernails that never grew back right after a fan belt caught them in 19. My father used to say you could read a man's whole life in his hands, and mine said engines. His said cattle, once. Wendell Kessler had run a small herd for 30 years before the arthritis, and then the stroke took that from him, one theft at a time. When his wife, my mother, died, I'd moved him into the little house behind mine, 40 feet of gravel between his back door and my kitchen window. And every morning I'd look out and see whether his kitchen light was on. That was our whole system. Light on by 7. He was fine. Light off, I walked over. 3 years of that. Some mornings, I resented the walk. I want to be honest about that, because the man I'm telling you about is not a saint, and neither is the sun. The thing I never fixed between us was a specific thing. My daughter, Rosalind, was 9, and she lived 400 miles east with her mother after the divorce. And my father blamed me for it, not out loud, not often. But he'd say things like, "A man holds his family together with both hands." And he'd say it while looking at my hands, the ones that could fix any engine but couldn't fix that. We hadn't talked about Rosalind in almost a year. There was a birthday card I'd never mailed sitting on the dash of my truck. I want you to remember that card. It matters later, in a way I didn't see coming. The morning it started, his kitchen light was off at 7. I walked over with 2 coffees, the way I did on the bad mornings, and I found him sitting at his little table with the radio going, the old AM set he kept because he didn't trust anything with a screen. He had it turned up loud. He looked at me and pointed at it with his good hand, and I set the coffees down and listened. It wasn't the emergency tone. That would have been easier to believe. It was a man's voice, a local voice, the fella who did the farm report every morning at 6. And he was not doing the farm report. He was saying the same 3 sentences over and over, and his voice was coming apart in the middle of them. Do not approach anyone who appears injured. Do not attempt to help them. Barricade and wait for instruction. My father turned the volume down. He had a way of getting very still when something was serious, a stillness left over from a lifetime of watching weather and animals for the thing about to go wrong. Curtis Hanley wouldn't say that as a joke, he said. Curtis was the farm report man. My father had known him 40 years. Something's got into town. The phone still worked that first hour. I called Rosalind's mother. It rang and rang. I called the shop and my apprentice, a kid named Toller, picked up and he was breathing wrong. And he said there was a woman in the parking lot of the feed store biting at the glass. And then the call dropped and never reconnected. I stood in my father's kitchen with a dead phone and a cooling coffee, and I watched, out his window, a pickup come down our road far too fast, weaving, and take out the Delgado's fence without slowing down and keep going. Get the truck, my father said. His voice was flat and certain, the voice he used to use on the herd. We go to your girl. We don't stop for anyone. That was the plan. 400 miles east to Rosalind. Simple. My truck was a diesel with a full tank because I always kept it full, a habit from a lean year when I couldn't afford to top it up whenever I liked. Half a tank of habit was about to become the only reason we lived past noon. I packed in 11 minutes. Water, what food was in both houses, my father's heart pills, his blood thinners, the cane he hated, a tire iron, a hunting rifle that had been my grandfather's, and a box and a half of ammunition that might as well have been museum pieces for all I'd fired them. I put my father in the passenger seat, and I buckled him in because his right hand couldn't manage the clip anymore. And he let me, which told me how frightened he was, because normally he'd have slapped my hands away and cursed me for treating him like a child. The birthday card was on the dash, Rosalind's name in my handwriting. I remember looking at it and thinking, I'll give it to her myself in 3 days. And I actually believed that. We got 2 miles. Route 9 out of Cresswell Bend runs down into a narrow cut between 2 hills where the old highway was blasted through the rock decades ago. And it's the only fast way east. When we came around the bend into that cut, the road was already a graveyard of stopped cars. Not a crash. Worse than a crash. People had stopped and gotten out and left their doors open. And I understood why before I saw why. Because the wind was coming toward us, and it carried a sound I had never heard before and have never stopped hearing since. Not screaming. Screaming has a shape, a beginning, and an end. This was a texture, a wet, layered, continuous sound. Dozens of throats at once, and under it the sound of a lot of feet on gravel. My father saw them first. His good hand came up and gripped my forearm hard enough to bruise. They were coming up the cut toward the stopped cars, out of Cresswell Bend, a loose flood of them. And even from 300 yards, I could see they moved wrong. Not slow. That's the lie people tell about them. That they're slow. Some were slow. But the fresh ones, the ones that had just turned, they still had all their coordination. And they ran like the thing chasing them was inside their own skin. I put the truck in reverse. That's when the second wave came out of the trees behind us, on the road we'd just driven, cutting us off from home. I did the only thing left. I put the truck at the rock face, where the old road had a maintenance turnout. A dirt track that switchbacked up over the hill instead of through the cut. A track I knew because I'd towed a stranded grader off it years ago. It was steep and washed out, and my father's head hit the ceiling twice. But the diesel clawed up it. And at the top, on a shelf of flat ground, the engine coughed once, twice. And I looked down, and the temperature gauge was buried in the red. Because in the panic on the switchback, I'd been redlining a cold engine up a grade it was never built for. And I, a man who fixed engines for a living, had cooked my own. We got maybe another 6 miles on that cracked block, nursing it, before it seized on a county road with nothing around us but dry hills and a fence line, 41 miles from the nearest thing on the map that meant anything. A town called Rell Junction, where the interstate was, where if anything organized was left, it would be. My father looked at the dead truck, and then at his own useless right leg, and then at me. "Now you see," he said quietly. "Leave the heavy man, son. Take the light road." I got out, and I looked back the way we'd come. Far down the county road, small with distance, I could see figures. Not many. 3, 4, but moving. Following the road, the way water follows a channel, because we'd driven it and they came after anything that moved. I did the math a man does. 41 miles. A father who could shuffle, at best, a quarter mile an hour on flat ground with a cane and not at all on a hill. Things behind us that never got tired. And a rifle I barely knew how to shoot. Then I opened his door, and I crouched, and I said, "Get on my back." He didn't. He gripped the door frame with his good hand, and he set his jaw, that half of it that worked. And for a second, the old rancher was fully back. The man who'd never once let me carry anything for him. "You'll die of me," he said. "That's a fact, not a fear. A fact. I did the arithmetic same as you." "Then we'll both be wrong about the arithmetic," I said. And I reached up and I took his good arm and I pulled. And because he was frightened, and because underneath 40 years of stubbornness, he did not actually want to die alone on a county road, he let me. If stories like this are why you're here, stay with me, because what the first night cost us is where it really begins. He was 171 pounds, and I was a strong man, but I want to be clear about what carrying a grown man actually is. It is not the movies. You cannot do it slung over one shoulder for more than a few hundred feet. The way that works, the only way, is a piggyback with his arms over your shoulders and his weight on your hips. And even then, your lower back becomes a single, hot wire within the first mile. And your hands cramp from gripping under his knees. And every step is a negotiation between falling forward and falling down. I made it 1.5 miles before I had to set him down behind a stock tank, a big rusted round thing that hit us both. And I lay in the dirt with my heart slamming and my father's hand on my chest. And he counted my heartbeats out loud, slow, the way you gentle a spooked horse until it came down. We couldn't stay on the road. The road was where they went. But off the road, in the open hills, the walking was worse. And I couldn't carry him over broken ground without going down. So we did a thing that took the rest of that first day. We followed the road at a distance, in the dry ditch and behind the fence line, close enough to use it for direction, far enough that a thing walking the asphalt wouldn't reach us before we saw it. By dusk, I'd carried him maybe 7 miles, in stages, and I was ruined. My hands wouldn't fully open. There was a place in my lower back that felt like something had torn, and something probably had. We holed up in a concrete culvert under the road, a big pipe you could sit up in, and I put my father at the closed dark end and myself at the mouth, with the rifle across my knees. And I made him eat and take his pills, and I counted them. That's when I found the first real problem, and it was worse than the things outside. His heart pills. I'd grabbed both bottles from his kitchen counter, and in the truck I'd been sure. But in the failing light, I looked at what I actually had. And one bottle was the blood thinner, near full, and the other, the one that mattered, the beta blocker that kept his damaged heart from racing itself to death, had maybe 9 pills in it. He took 2 a day. He'd been meaning to refill it. It was on his list. The list on the counter I'd left behind. 4.5 days of medicine. 41 miles to go at a pace of 7 miles a day if I didn't die of him first, which was 6 days minimum. And that was assuming Rell Junction had a pharmacy that hadn't been stripped, and a working one, in Mercy. I didn't tell him. He was already asleep, or pretending, his breath a slow, ragged saw at the dark end of the pipe. I sat at the mouth of the culvert, and I did the arithmetic he was so proud of. And for the first time, I understood the shape of it. It wasn't a race against the dead. The dead I could sometimes hide from. It was a race against his own heart, and I was carrying the clock on my back. The second day is when I learned the rules of them. They hunted movement and sound, and they lost interest in stillness fast, but they had a memory of a kind, a stupid persistence. And if they'd seen you go into a place, they would stand outside it and moan, and that moan would bring more. So the game was to never let one see where you went to ground. I learned to move in the last light and the first light. When the low sun threw long shadows I could read. And to lie up flat through the bright middle of the day when they could see a moving man a half-mile off. I learned that carrying my father meant I could not fight. A man with 170 pounds on his back cannot swing a tire iron. He can barely turn around. So every choice became about not being seen at all, which meant slower, which meant more days, which meant the pill bottle getting lighter in my jacket pocket, a weight I checked with my thumb 100 times a day. On the afternoon of the second day, from a rise, we saw Rell Junction for the first time, far off and small, a smudge of low buildings where the interstate crossed. And we saw the smoke. Not the black smoke of a fire. Gray, steady, controlled, the smoke of people. Somebody down there was burning something on purpose, which meant somebody down there was organized, which meant hope. And I pointed it out to my father, and for one moment, his ruined face did something I hadn't seen in 3 years. It lifted. "Your girl," he said. "We get to Rell. We find a working phone, a working anything. We get to your girl." He'd stopped saying leave the heavy man. Somewhere in the first 2 days he'd decided, against every instinct of his life, to be carried, to live. And I think it was the smoke that did it. The idea that there was somewhere to be carried to. That was the second day. It was the last full day I had my father, the way I'd always known him. Because on the third morning, going down a dry wash to skirt a cluster of them on the road, I slipped. It was nothing. A shelf of loose shale I misjudged with a man on my back and legs that had been failing for 2 days. I went down sideways, twisting to take the fall on myself instead of him. And I did. I took it on my hip and shoulder. But my father's right leg, the dead one he couldn't protect or brace, folded under both our weight. And I heard it. A green stick crack, the sound of a dry branch. He didn't scream. That was the terrible thing. He couldn't feel it fully, the nerves in that leg long gone. So he just looked down at his own ankle bent the wrong way in the shale and said, in a small, puzzled voice, "Well, there goes the last of it." Now he couldn't even shuffle. Now he was cargo, fully, all 171 pounds of him. And we were 19 miles from the smoke. I splinted the ankle with a rifle cleaning rod and strips of my shirt, kneeling in the wash with them somewhere close, working fast. And my hands, my ruined engine hands, shook so badly I had to stop twice and press them flat against the cool shale to make them obey. My father watched me work. He'd gone somewhere quiet inside himself. "Baird," he said, "the card on the dash, Rosalind's card." I'd left it in the truck. Of course I'd left it in the truck. 19 miles back, in a dead diesel, in a country full of the dead. "I saw it every morning you drove me to the clinic," he said. "Sitting there. You writing it and not sending it, month after month. You know why you never sent it?" He wasn't accusing. His voice was gentle in a way it almost never was with me. "Because sending it makes it real that she's far. Long as it's on the dash, she's just about to get it. You keep the people you love on the dashboard, son, where you can see them and never quite reach them. You did it to her. You've been doing it to me for 3 years, 40 feet of gravel away." I didn't answer. I finished the splint, and I got him on my back. And I stood up, and my torn back screamed, and I started walking. Because there was nothing to say that was truer than just carrying him. The midpoint of this, the thing that changed everything, came at the river on the 3rd night. There's a river before Rell Junction, and the county road crosses it on a 2-lane bridge. And when we came to the top of the last rise above it in the dark, I saw that the bridge was the whole answer to the smoke. There were people on it, living people. They'd blocked both ends with vehicles, and they had lights, and they had rifles, real ones. And they were burning a barrel for warmth. And they'd made the bridge into a wall with the river as their moat. And it was, I understood at once, the smartest thing I'd seen since the world fell apart. A safe place, an actual safe place, with people who'd thought it through. I nearly wept. I set my father down against a road sign, and I said, "We made it. There they are. That's Rell." And my father, who had spent his whole life reading the thing about to go wrong, looked down at those lights for a long time, and then he said, "Watch a minute before you go running down there." So we watched, and in 20 minutes, we saw what the bridge people did. A pickup came from the far side, from the direction of Rell. Driving slow, headlights on, honking a friendly pattern, a family in it. You could see the shapes of kids in the back. The bridge people let it come almost to the vehicles blocking the near end. And then they didn't let them through. 2 men came out with lights and made the family get out and stand in the headlights. And they checked them, arms, necks. And then they took the truck. They took the truck and the fuel and the food out of the truck. And they let the family walk on across the bridge and out the other side into the dark on foot with nothing. And one of the bridge men fired a shot over their heads to make them go faster, and the kids ran. They weren't a rescue. They were a toll booth. They'd figured out the same thing I had, that the bridge was the only safe crossing to Rell for miles. And they'd turned it into a business, and their price was everything you carried. I had a rifle worth taking, a splinted father worth nothing to them, and 19 miles of dead country at my back. I want you to think for a second about what you'd have done there, where you're listening from, Whatever safe room you're in, hold that bridge in your head. Now back to the dark above the river. We had one thing they wanted less than a fuel truck, and one thing they wanted not at all, which was a broken old man. And that, my father pointed out in a whisper, was the whole opening. They want strong men and full trucks, he said. They stop those. A cripple and a spent son crawling in the dark, on foot, with nothing? They'll watch you come. They won't spend a bullet or a man on you. Not worth it. Nobody robs a beggar. He almost smiled with the working half of his face. For once in my life, being worth nothing is the whole point. He was right. And he was also missing the thing he couldn't see because he was on my back and not on my legs. To cross the bridge on foot, past armed men who took everything, I would have to walk into their lights and let them search us and let them take the rifle, our only defense against everything behind us, and trust that they'd let two worthless men pass because worthless men aren't worth the effort. Trust, the most expensive thing left in the world, or there was another way, and I'd seen it in the first minute. The way you see a hairline crack in a beam before you consciously know you've seen it. Downstream, a quarter mile, a set of old concrete pilings stood in the river where a second, older bridge had been. Long collapsed, just the stumps left. And between them, the river ran wide and shallow and slow over a gravel bar. In summer, in a drought year like this one, a strong man could wade it. A strong man carrying 170 pounds at night in cold water, with a broken-ankled father who couldn't swim a stroke and couldn't help himself if I went down. Cross the bridge and lose the rifle, and trust the toll booth men not to change their minds when they saw a rifle worth having. Or cross the Black River in the dark and trust my own back not to fail at the one moment it could not fail. My father knew which one I'd pick before I did. Not the water, he said. Baird, look at me. You got nothing left in your back, and I can't hold on if you go under. The water kills us both quiet. The bridge only maybe kills us, and mostly not because we're not worth killing. He gripped my jacket. Give them the rifle. Walk into the light. Let them see two nothing men. It's the coward's road, and it's the live road. Take the live road. And here is the thing I have to tell you straight, because it's the center of everything that happened after. I did not take his road. I looked at those men taking a family's truck and firing over children's heads. And something in me that had spent 3 years walking 40 feet of gravel and resenting it, something that had kept a birthday card on a dashboard for a year, because sending it made a hard thing real, something in me could not walk into those lights and hand over the last thing that stood between my father and the dead and say please. I could not put his life in the hands of men like that. I trusted my own broken back more than I trusted their mercy. I chose the water. I want to be honest that it was not courage. My father was right that it was the more dangerous road. I chose it because trusting those men felt like the same failure as the dashboard, the same refusal to just reach the 40 feet and take hold. And I could not fail that way twice. I chose the river to prove something to a man on my back. That is the truth. And it cost what truths like that cost. We went downstream in the dark, along the bank, to the old pilings. The water, when I stepped into it, was so cold it took the air out of me. My father's arms locked over my shoulders. I could feel his heart going against my back, too fast, the beta blocker fighting a battle it was losing. And I remember thinking, with a strange calm, that if I went down here, the cold would probably take his heart before the water took his lungs, and that this would be, in some grotesque mercy, faster. The gravel bar was real. That part, he was wrong about being impossible. Or I was lucky, or both. For the first 40 feet, the water was only thigh deep and the bottom was firm, and I found I could do it. One planted foot at a time, feeling ahead with my toes for the drop-off. My father, a still weight breathing at my ear, whispering counts, 1, 2, 3, the way he'd counted my heartbeats behind the stock tank on the first day. Then, at the midpoint of the river, where the channel ran deepest between two of the old pilings, my foot found the edge of the gravel bar and past it nothing, a cold, dropping nothing. And the current there was stronger than it looked from the rise, and it leaned on us, patient and enormous. And my torn back, at that exact moment, at the one moment it could not, gave out. Not all at once, a giving, a tearing warmth low in my spine, and my left leg buckling, and my father's weight going from a burden I was carrying to a force that was pulling me down and sideways into the black channel. And the water coming up over my chest, my chin, and my father's arms, instead of clutching tighter in panic, doing the opposite. He let go. He unlocked his arms from my shoulders on purpose, in the cold and the dark and the current. And he shoved himself backward off my back toward the gravel bar we'd just crossed, the shallow side, the side where a man might grab a piling stump and hold. And by taking his weight off me in that half second, he let me get my buckled leg back under myself and my chin back above the water. I turned in the current and I grabbed for him. I got a fistful of his jacket. I had him. For one whole second, in the middle of the black river, I had my father's jacket in my ruined hand, and the current pulling him one way and me the other, and my back a torn ruin and my feet on the crumbling edge of the gravel bar. He looked at me. There was enough moon to see the working half of his face. "The light road," he said. "Take it. Send the card." And he shrugged his arms out of the jacket sleeves, not violently, the way a man takes off a coat at the end of a day. He let his own weight do the rest, and the channel took him, an old rancher who couldn't swim a stroke, into the dark and downstream and gone. And I was left standing thigh-deep in the freezing river, holding an empty jacket, and the current pushing me toward the shallows he'd shoved me toward the live road, toward the far bank and Rell. I did not go after him. I want you to understand that I could not. That a man with a torn back cannot swim a flooding channel after another man. That going in after him was 2 deaths instead of 1. That this is the arithmetic he did in the half-second he let go, faster and cleaner than I ever could. The last calculation of a man who'd spent his whole life reading the thing about to go wrong. He saw the beam crack before I did. He always had. I made the far bank. I don't remember most of it. I remember lying in the gravel and the reeds on the Rell side with his empty jacket clutched against my chest, so cold I couldn't feel my hands, and the toll booth lights burning yellow up the river to my right, and the water going by black and endless and quiet, quiet, quiet. No splash, no cry, because a man who has decided does not fight the water. The bridge men never even saw me. He was right about that, too. A single soaked man crawling out of the river with an empty coat and nothing worth taking. Not worth a bullet, not worth a light. I crawled up the bank and past their world entirely, worthless and alive, exactly as he'd planned. Except he'd planned to be worthless and alive beside me. And instead, he'd made himself the one thing they'd never take by becoming the one thing I could never carry across. I walked into Rell Junction at dawn on the 4th day. It was real. That much of the world held. There were people, an actual muster point at the old grain co-op. Men and women who checked me for bites and gave me water and a blanket and asked me questions I couldn't answer through my chattering teeth. There was a woman doctor there. Older, calm, who looked at my back and my hands and my face and didn't ask what I'd lost. Because by the fourth day, everyone who walked in had lost something, and the ones who walked in alone had lost the most. They had a radio. A real one, with reach, patched into a chain of other muster points spreading east along the interstate. And on the second day in Rell, when I could stand, I gave them a name and a place 400 miles east, and a girl, 9 years old, Rosalind, and her mother's name. And I sat by that radio for 3 days while the message went hand to hand down the line of the living. On the 6th day, the word came back up the chain. They were alive. They'd made it to a muster point of their own, a school gymnasium, safe, fed, waiting. And there was a message relayed back for me. 4 words in my daughter's voice passed mouth to mouth through a dozen strangers across 400 miles of ruined country. And by the time it reached me, it was worn smooth as a river stone. And it was this: "Dad, come get me." I still had his jacket. In the inside pocket, wet and then dried stiff, I'd found his blood thinner bottle and the beta blocker bottle with 4 pills left, and something else I hadn't known he'd taken from the truck in those 11 minutes I was packing. The card. Rosalind's birthday card. He'd taken it off the dash. He must have palmed it while I was loading water. This old man who couldn't work a seatbelt clip, and slid it into his jacket because he knew me, because he'd watched me keep her on the dashboard for a year, and he was not going to let me leave her there. I mailed it, in a way. 400 miles took me 11 days on foot and on the beds of trucks and once on a horse, moving muster point to muster point down the spine of the dead country. And when I finally walked into that gymnasium and my daughter hit me at a dead run, I gave her the card in my own hand, the one my father had carried off a dead man's dashboard into a river and would not let go of even when he let go of everything else. If you've ever kept someone you love on a dashboard, 40 feet or 400 miles away, tell me, did you ever mail the card? Or is it still sitting there? That's the only thing he ever really wanted me to answer. People hear this, and they ask me if I regret the river. If I'd taken his road, the coward's road, the live road he begged me to take, would he be alive? And the answer, the true one, the one that sits in my chest like cold water, is yes. Probably yes. The bridge men would have taken the rifle and let 2 worthless men pass, and I'd have a father with a broken ankle and no medicine in a muster point. And maybe the pills would have run out, and his heart would have gone anyway. Or maybe not. I don't know. I'll never know. I chose the water to prove I was not the man who leaves things on the dashboard. And the proving of it is what put him in the current. He knew, I think, the second we stepped into that river, that my back would fail. He'd read it, the way he read weather. And he came into the water anyway, because I was his son and I'd decided. And then in the middle of it, he did the only thing left that would turn my mistake into just 1 death, instead of 2. He made himself into the thing that could not be carried, and then he set me down. Carry someone 40 miles, and you learn a thing nobody tells you. You think the weight is the hard part. The weight is not the hard part. The hard part is that carrying a man means you can't reach him. Both your arms are full of him, and you cannot turn around and hold his face. I carried my father across a broken country, and I never once, in all those miles, got to just look at him and hold him, because I was always under him, always facing forward, always toward the next thing about to go wrong. The only time I got to hold his face was the last second in the river, with a fistful of his jacket. And he used that 1 second, the only one we had, to tell me to send the card. My daughter is 11 now. we're together, in a place that holds, further east than Rell. And the world is smaller and harder than it was, but it turns. She keeps the card in a box under her bed. She never asks about her grandfather's leg or the river. She asks about the cattle. She wants to know what the herd looked like at dawn when he ran it. 30 years ago, before any of us, before the stroke, before the dashboard. So I tell her. I tell her about a strong man reading the weather with his whole body, and I keep my arms free, and I hold her face while I do it. Both hands, the ruined engine hands. And I do not face forward, and I do not look toward the next thing about to go wrong. I just look at her. That's the whole of what he was trying to teach me. 40 feet of gravel and 40 miles of river to learn it. Put down the weight when you finally can. Free your arms. Hold the face while it's still in front of you. I carried my father 40 miles because he couldn't run from the dead. He carried me the last 400, and I never felt it, because that's how the good ones do it. From the dashboard, where you can never quite reach them, and they never, ever let go.